From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. Is Andre Johnson
Jr.
Not forget the Jr. It's very important to remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And also, hello to the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Glad you have found us here. Andre, it is Friday in the city of New Orleans. It's always a fun weekend this weekend. It is Marty Gras weekend. Parades have started. Parades are rolling. Everyone having a good time. Looks like the weather's going to cooperate. So it is a big weekend ahead in the city of New Orleans. I have never done the Friday kind of pregame thing that I know is very popular in this city, but I see a lot of photos. So if you're out there partaking, have a great time. Enjoy the city of New Orleans this weekend. It's a fun stretch of parades, and it really is the weekend where New Orleans takes center stage around the world. It's always a fun weekend.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because of all the Super Bowl stuff, but it really feels like Mardi Gras kind of snuck up on us this year.
I have no doubt about it.
Like, it's Mardi Gras weekend already.
Right.
Like, typically it feels like by the time Mardi Gras weekend gets here, it's like, oh, finally.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm just like, where did this come from?
Yeah, it's funny because we do that big broadcast Mardi Gras Day, and I'm like, ooh, thank goodness. I had a free moment like 2 weeks ago, and I ordered my costume that we have to wear. So thank God I did, because it just became a blur, and I forgot all about Mardi Gras. And yet here we are, and it is going to be a fun weekend, no doubt about it. So if you're out there, enjoy it. You got Endymion, Bacchus, Thoth, Orpheus, all those parades, and obviously Mardi Gras Day on Tuesday. So we'll be there, and check us out, Mardi Gras Day for sure. I know we're all going to be together, me, you, and Garland, right? Yes, we're all going to be together
Zulu parade
at the Crew of Zulu. That's what we've been doing that for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So have fun with that. Also, today, Friday, good morning, and there's news to be talked about. There are situations to discuss, and that's where we're going to go with the big picture today. But how you feeling so far?
I'm feeling good. Friday, you mentioned all the Mardi Gras stuff. It's going to be a lively weekend in the city. So, I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to us getting into some Saints stuff because, like you mentioned, Thursday, it came out what the actual salary cap number is going to be, which is going to officially place the Saints to being around $47 million
Just
over
like it was
the cap,
projected,
as it was projected. So now, as we start to look at that $47 million, the next step is saying, okay, with the report coming out earlier this week that, Derek Carr is likely to return to the Saints, we've kind of got that domino out of the way. So now you start looking at other players on the roster and other ways that the Saints could potentially save themselves some money. And when you do that, you look at a guy like Cameron Jordan, one of the greatest Saints of all time, arguably the greatest defensive player in franchise history. So as we look at Cam Jordan, one of the greats in this city and on this team, how should the Saints approach his future going into a very difficult offseason?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors here because you had the sentimental factor. I think if you were to just gauge the fans, who's the most popular Saint in the locker room currently, the list doesn't go far before you add Cam Jordan's name. I mean, probably number one or 1A. Taysom, Cam, maybe Tyron. Just in terms of just the most popular Saints player, he's the most engaged guy when it comes to the community that I have ever seen, that I have ever covered. I have never seen another player be that involved with school visits as much as Cam Jordan has. I said it on a final say we had a couple of weeks back on Overtime when I was pulling for him to win the Walter Payton Man of the Year, because if you added up every other player's school visits on the roster and probably multiplied it by 10, I don't think you'd come close to the amount of school visits Cam Jordan has had with the city of New Orleans, area schools in the city of New Orleans, and obviously the metro area. So there is a strong bond there with Cam Jordan. He's the longest tenured Saint, drafted first round, 2011, and he wants to be a Saint. He wants to keep playing. I mean, I've asked him that several times, and I asked him again Super Bowl week, and he reiterated he wants to continue to play. But there are realities at stake here, and that's why we're even having this discussion right now, because the truth of the matter is I don't know if there's a guarantee that Cam Jordan is back in 2025. I'm not saying he should or shouldn't be. I just think there's a financial reality and there's a where he's at in his career reality that must be discussed. So when it comes to Cam Jordan, similar discussion we had with Taysom Hill where I felt like Taysom Hill, probably they would ultimately land on just kind of standing pat and just kind of letting it go. I don't know if that's going to be the case. That was just our opinion at the time. But Cam Jordan, I don't know if that's going to be the case because I don't think you could stand pat with both. You got to choose one. And even still, I don't think they're going to stand. Maybe they don't stand pat with either one. I think the big question for Cam Jordan, and I hate this question because these guys have put in, so much blood, sweat, tears. He has been an Iron Man. He has been the epitome of durability. Cam Jordan, I'm talking about. But the reality is he turns 36 in July. And I think the question will be asked, if it hasn't been asked already, because we were kind of asking him questions generally about this when the season ended, is is Cam Jordan willing to take a pay cut? I hate asking that question. I don't think anyone should have to take a pay cut. And we've said as much with other players on this podcast, so I believe the same thing when it comes to Cam Jordan. But I also believe Cam's situation is a little bit different because, again, you're only as good as your market. You're only as good as what someone is willing to pay you. And the reality of the situation is Cam Jordan is scheduled to make $12.5 million in base salary in 2025. The team is $47 million over the salary cap. And the truth of the matter is, if Cam would not be willing to take a pay cut and essentially force the team to release him, would he come anywhere near that on the open market? Even with the former Saints head coach that's now currently in Denver, who obviously loves Cam Jordan. I'll ask you, Andre Johnson Jr., do you think Cam would come close to $12.5 million at 36 years old?
I do not think he comes close to that on the open market.
What do you think he could realistically get on the open market?
You could probably cut that into maybe a fourth, maybe $2 or $3 million.
It's exactly what I was thinking. And a little bit above league minimum because he's a guy that's obviously been around the block and he's got some football left in him. He's at that point in his career where he'll have random spurts where he can touch greatness. He's just not going to touch greatness every single play. And he's not going to be as dominant as he once was in his career. So, look, this is where he's at also from a football standpoint. 6 sacks in 2 seasons, and then, look, he did not have the changeover in defensive line coach from Ryan Nielsen to Ty Grantham really had an impact on him more than anybody, to the point where last year we're like, where is Cam? Where is Cam? He is not on the football field. Then all of a sudden he gets more snaps and he gets more productive. So he still can produce. He still can play at a level where he deserves a spot on a team, the Saints team. He's just, in my opinion, not where you would pay him $12.5 million. Plus, there is the sentimental factor. There is the loyalty factor. Not everybody's going to have this, and not everybody should have this. And sometimes this can be a dangerous word, but is there a loyalty from Cam to the Saints, the only team he's ever played for, the only team he's said repeatedly he wants to play for, drafted the first round in 2011. Is there a loyalty factor where he would be willing to take a little bit less and convert? Not when I say take a little bit less, you can earn it back and makeable incentives. But obviously, the coaching staff has a big say in how many incentives you achieve because they can control how much or how little you obviously play. So, with all that in mind, I would say of all the candidates for pay cut, this is what this is. This is not a restructure. This is a pay cut. I think the Saints would have the best chance at Cam saying yes more than anyone else. I have no idea if he would do that, and I am not advocating for him to do that. I am just expressing the reality of the situation. So that's where it currently stands with Cam Jordan, at least in my opinion, how they would approach it. I just don't see them carrying the huge cap number he would keep in 2025, and you can't cut him before June 1st, which brings me to my next option. If you do not take a pay cut, I think the next step would be thank you for your service, probably a post-June 1st cut for Cam Jordan, which would net the Saints $10 million in cap space, but not until after June the 1st. The ironic thing about all this is if they truly go to a true 3-4 and they feel like they have the pieces to do so, Cam is the one that would benefit the most because Cam came out of Cal as a 3-4 defensive end. Notice I did not say outside linebacker. I said defensive end. A 3-4 defensive end, hand in the dirt. That's what he did at Cal. Cam did at Cal, and he was a run-stopping 3-4 defensive end at first until he developed enough to become one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Arguably the most underrated pass rusher in the NFL when he was, getting 13, 14, 15 sacks a season. But that's the ironic thing, but there is no irony to being 36 years old at that position. It's just it's just the nature and it's the cycle of life in the NFL. I would hate to see Cam go because I still think he has a magnetic presence. I still think he's got a personality people gravitate to. I still think he's got the stature where people will listen. And I think he has played through a lot of pain, and he's been through the ups and the downs, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows with this organization, at least during his tenure here. But I truly think the reality of the situation is this. Unless they can find another way to make it work with some kind of restructure that I don't know about, I think there's a chance he would have to take a pay cut to stay, or he could be gone in 2025.
Yeah, it's always a difficult conversation. Not necessarily when you're talking about vets, but when you're talking about a Mount Rushmore player in your franchise's history.
That's a great way to put it.
And that's what Cam Jordan is. Cam Jordan is one of the 4 greatest Saints of all time. I don't think that's very debatable, but you could definitely make the argument that he is. And then you look at the fact that he has embraced this city like in ways that nearly no other player has ever embraced the city of New Orleans. They always say your best ability is availability. Well, he's been available
always
his entire career. He's been a constant despite, when the team was a horrible, historically bad defense to when they were the best defense in the league to now. He has been a constant, on that defensive line. And even if you just look at last season, after Dennis Allen got outed, in that second half of the season, Cam Jordan was one of your better defensive players. Cam Jordan, if I remember correctly, sacked Jay Daniels. He had a good hurry on Jameis Winston on a 2-point conversion that I remember. Like, Cam Jordan was making plays in the second half of the season better than maybe anybody outside of Brian Brzee on that defensive line. And even off the field, there's value as a vet, as a presence in that locker room when you look at the fact that you've got young guys in there like a Peyton Turner who's still trying to find his place in the league, like a Brian Brzee who you could argue might be your best player on the defense right now, like Isaiah Foskey who has not been able to find his way in this league, but if this team goes to a 3-4, that might be his opportunity to do so. So there's value for Cam Jordan as a vet as well, but you can't ignore the dollar signs. And you can't ignore that the NFL stands for not for long. And it's been a long run for Cam, but when you look at legends in this league, the unfortunate truth is that legends in this league don't always finish on the team that they start with. Cam Newton's the greatest Panther ever. He didn't finish unless you count the year he came back.
Yeah.
Carolina let go of Cam. He went to New England. Julio Jones didn't finish in Atlanta. Adrian Peterson didn't finish in Minnesota. Peyton Manning didn't finish in Indy. Tom Brady didn't finish in New England. Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, Russell Wilson, Derrick Henry, all legends, some of the greatest players in their franchise history, and they didn't finish on the team where they made their name for. So, at the end of the day, the Saints are going to have to look at and it sucks because I think if the Saints were $23 million under the cap, this isn't a conversation that we're talking about. We're talking about this guy has earned the right to retire as a Saint. But because you're $47 million over, the Saints may not have that luxury with Cam Jordan. And it stinks because if there's anybody who deserves to retire a Saint on this team, it's Cam Jordan. But unfortunately, that may not be the reality.
So I threw out the idea of a pay cut because I think that's the path.
Yeah.
And if you're Cam, anybody, any walk of life, you got to say, okay, well, what's the reality of what I would be worth on the open market? And you said $2-3 million is kind of the range I had, a little bit above veteran league minimum. 36 years old, it's just the reality, guys. It's just the reality regardless of how many sacks you had throughout your career. So if I were the Saints and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, okay, what can I ask him to cut to where I know it would still be more than what the open market would get, and I would still get the benefit of the lower cap charge or lower cap number? What if you cut that in half?
I was thinking about 4 or 5.
Yeah, 12.5 to 6.
Yeah.
It's still showing respect because you're not dropping them down all the way to league minimum. It's still more than you likely would get on the open market. And if it's structured right, Cam could still attain some of that back with incentives and bonuses. And look, for as many times as it feels like they're trying to phase him out, the bottom line is they've had more injuries at that position perhaps than any other group. So he is always there. So at some point you got to turn to your guy because he's always available and he's steady. So I think there would be a happy medium number. I hope they can find a resolution. I hope the plan is not to say, look, we're just going to let him, we're just going to cut him and move on. I do think you can't do every single situation like that. I mean, you can't be too tied to every single player, and sometimes loyalty or sentiment, being sentimental can sometimes, hurt an organization. Because I've criticized the organization for being a little too much like that sometimes. But I think when it comes to Cam Jordan, I think you'd have to at least give him that option. It's up to him to take it or not take it and go test the market if he chooses not to. But I do think there is a way to do it where he wouldn't be happy about it. No one would.
Yeah.
But if he wants to keep playing, it would be the best case scenario. I think there's the happy medium there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely fair, especially when you consider the fact that there's a need for Cam Jordan next season because the team is likely going to go to this 3-4 defense. Mm-hmm. And the Saints over the past decade or so, even longer, they have drafted a specific type of player. And it has not necessarily been a player that was built to play in a 3-4 on that defensive line. And you mentioned it. Cam might be the only player in that defensive line room who has experience working in a 3-4. Mm-hmm. I mentioned value as a vet. There's value as a vet when it comes to teaching the younger players and how to, survive and thrive in a 3-4 system. There's value on the field. And, last season we saw the Saints kind of try to move Cam to the interior of the defensive line to see how he would do there. Mm-hmm. There's value in saying, okay, well, this guy already has a lot of experience, probably more experience than anybody on the roster, doing what we want to do next season. So I think that Cam Jordan can still help your team. Is he going to get 13 sacks and, make the Pro Bowl and All-Pro? No, probably not. But can he bring value to the field in a limited capacity? Yes. Can he bring value to your locker room? Yes. And we already know what he does for the city, bringing value to the city. So I think there's still a place for Cam Jordan here, and I'm with you. I hope that they work it out, whether it's pay cut or whatever, because I would like to see Cam Jordan in black and gold next year.
So would I. A restructure as you push more money into those voidable years that are on his contract. I mean, you could do that where he still gets paid the same amount, but man, it's the inevitable cycle of a restructuring guys over 30, which I think that gets you kind of in a mess.
Yeah,
and I think in his case, it probably would not be the fiscally responsible thing to do if you were the Saints, just because of where he's at in his career and how much football he truly has left. Like you said, there is value. It's just a matter of assigning a number to that value. And like you've said, I think there is a sweet spot there where everyone would end up in the best possible case scenario for 2025, and hopefully they can find that, because I would hate to see that relationship in, because sometimes you mentioned all those players that didn't finish their career where they started. Mm-hmm. When it does happen, it's a good thing. It was good that Drew didn't play anywhere else. I mean, obviously he started his career somewhere else, but it's good that he didn't sign somewhere else after he retired or whatever the case may be. Or who else am I thinking of that started and stopped in the same place? It's hard to pick sometimes because there's so many.
Honestly, yeah,
so many guys that didn't. I don't know.
I'm gonna say even didn't Joe Montana play any?
He played in Kansas City. I'm trying to think, man.
Most all-time. I mean,
wow.
Calvin Johnson, but that's only because he retired early.
Okay, I'm drawing.
Barry Sanders, but he also retired.
Ray Lewis,
early.
There you go. Ray Lewis, there's one. So yeah, it's as we just reiterated, it's hard to start and stop in the same spot. I'd love to see it happen, but it's hard to see a player start and finish in the same spot in his career. I guess technically Ramczyk would be that, since he's going to retire.
Yeah,
a short retirement. So
Alvin Kamara, hopefully.
Alvin Kamara. So we'll see. Stay tuned with Cam Jordan. The decision has to be coming soon, though, because, again, they got to be salary cap compliant by early March.
And this might be an easier decision, not to throw stones, but this might be an easier decision if over the past 10 years when you've been trying to draft your next premier defensive lineman, you were able to do so, but
still haven't been able to do it.
I'm about to say, we know what happened with Trey Hendrickson. Peyton Turner has not panned out to be what you wanted him to be as a first-round pick.
Davenport.
That was the next name. Marcus Davenport, has not been and was not what you thought he would be. Isaiah Foskey hasn't broken loose into that. So if you were maybe able to draft another prime defensive linemen with those early picks you invested into that position, maybe we're not here having this conversation, but that has not been the case.
Well, speaking of that, because we're all focusing on the defensive line, and it's been a hot-button topic for this organization because they've invested so much, and if you really scored it all, I would say they haven't gotten their money's worth out of that investment just as a group. And they're doing their best to address that with an interesting hire. Kellen Moore's getting closer and closer to closing out his first defensive staff, and there is a familiar name coming to the Saints. I was able to confirm this on Thursday, and why don't you tell him who that is?
He's from LSU, actually. What's his name again?
Bo Davis.
Yeah, Bo Davis from LSU. So another local guy, and the most interesting part about it, another college guy. That's kind of been the theme when you look at how this defensive staff is shaped up. It's not a lot of guys who have been in the league and, 20 years, 10 years in the NFL. It's a lot of guys who are coming up from college and just fresh, moldable minds.
It's really interesting because that's a lot of college. Now, in Bo Davis's case, he has coached at the pro level before.
Yeah.
He's kind of been back and forth. He was at Texas. It took a lot for LSU to get him from Texas to come to his alma mater at LSU. I think he's originally a Mississippi native. I'm not sure where he went to high school, but I know he double-checked that for me. I think he did play at LSU, his alma mater. His track record at Texas was a great one in terms of recruiting and also developing guys. I got a couple names here. Murphy, Sweat, in the 2024 draft, a couple guys he developed. So he has a reputation for recruiting and a reputation for developing, which is not always easy to find a guy that can do both at the collegiate level. Bo Davis was able to do so, hence why the LSU Tigers went so hard to get him from Texas to come to LSU. And from what I understand, they paid him 1.5, I think. It was not cheap to get him to come from. I mean, how would it be from Texas to LSU?
He did play for LSU.
Okay, he did play for LSU, and he's got a couple of guys right now in the mix to get drafted from LSU that he developed last year, and Swinson, and obviously Savion Jones as well.
Yeah.
So I think this is this is probably the most underrated assistant coach hire just in general when you talk about the NFL, because it has such an impact on what you do defensively. Because if defensive line is stout and, for lack of a better term, they're beasts up front, you can do so much more on the back end when you only have to devote 4 guys to a pass rush. We saw the dip. I alluded to it earlier. We saw the massive dip when they went from Ryan Nielsen to Todd Grantham. And on the flip side, when they went from, my goodness, I forgot who the D-line coach was before Ryan Nielsen. They pulled him from NC State. So he was a college guy that came up. So it's a huge hire. I'm very curious to know why they're focusing so much on college guys, because you just don't see that very much in the NFL. But it's a huge hire, and I think there was such a need for an upgrade there. It was one of the first things Darren Rizzi did when he took over as interim, is that he pulled Grantham into an advisor role and gave that to Brian Young, the defensive line. I guess he was the assistant D-line coach to become the D-line coach. So it's a huge hire, and it's a different. It was a little bit out of left field. No one saw this coming. So I'm very curious. I'm also very curious. Look, the college football calendar just doesn't make any sense, because there's no easy way for an assistant or a head coach to leave a program, because you're always in the midst of some recruiting class. You're always in the midst of something happening. It's the never-ending cycle of college football recruiting that just really grinds on these guys. That's why a lot of these guys, when they hit the opportunity, they jump to go to the pros, because you ain't got to recruit. Right. You just got to develop. So I'm very curious to see, because they brought in a lot of D tackles and defensive ends, how this impacts LSU going forward, because obviously if you don't have the guy coaching them up, who is going to be the guy coaching them up? And this is now, I got it written down here, this will be their 8th or 9th defensive line coach since 2020.
Wow.
So that's a spot. They got to find somebody that's going to stick around for a while. So, yeah, Bo Davis helps the Saints, but that's a blow for LSU.
It definitely is, and it's so interesting when you look at the places that he's been, because outside of UTSA, where he was for 1 year, he's coaching like big-time programs. LSU, Alabama, Texas. Those are 3 of the premier, college football schools and brands that there are. And just coaching at those 3, you're coaching some dogs on that defensive line. And, you mentioned he's touched in the league. He was with the Jags for a year. He was with the Detroit Lions for a couple years. So, now touching down with the Saints in a city and a market that he's familiar with in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm interested to see what he'll do with the defensive line that it needs some help, because I remember when we looked at the team last year, we looked at, which wasn't necessarily the case because of injuries, but we looked at the secondary and we said, yeah, that secondary, they're the strongest unit on the team. The linebackers, as long as they've got the Mario and Pete, they'll be fine. But there were questions along that defensive line, and it started with Chase Young, who we don't know what the future of Chase Young is going to be.
Who knows what can happen? Yeah.
We started with Chase Young. What can you get out of Cam Jordan? Will Brian Brzee take that leap? Will Foskey and Peyton Turner sticks? You know, those are kind of the questions that are going to carry into the next season.
Yeah, and it's going to be a whole new look to the defense, both the way they're coached, the scheme. You know,
I'm curious to see what they can
do they go all
in
with 3-4? How do they approach free agency? By the way, as you mentioned, the cap has been set. The Saints are officially $47 million over. It's fun. It's going to be a fun offseason because there's going to be a lot of things because we're just so not used to this. We're not used to this version of the Saints. We don't know how they're going to approach things because we haven't seen a down or we haven't seen anything when it comes to this new coaching staff. So I'm here for it, though. I'm ready to welcome it. I'm ready for a totally different new approach. I'm ready for a just kind of a fresh outlook, a fresh perspective on the way things have been done around here for a long, long time. So it should be fun moving forward.
I'm ready to see how they clear that checkbook to make all those moves happen.
Well, there's more to come. I can promise you.
Yeah, I'm curious to see all the restructures and moves that they're going to have to make to get cap compliant, and not just cap compliant, but preferably with $20 million under the cap to have enough room to sign those draft picks and make moves in free agency because, you know, they want to be more aggressive is the report this year. So
and remember, all this news going on, like they're still at the combine watching potential prospects.
Exactly.
Some we haven't even touched on
Right.
yet. This goes to show you just how crazy the combine is. All right, we got to get out of here. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. Have a safe and happy Mardi Gras. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.